It's nowhere found. In other words, what is happening is a great claim from the evolutionists without providing any of the evidence. But wait a minute, here's the evidence. We've got it out on National Geographic. National Geographic gave us all the evidence we need. 1999, October 15th. National Geographic Society and the Feathered Dinosaur, Archaeoraptor. Pages and pages, even colored pictures of this intermediate to prove evolution is true. Well, let's take a look at what happened to this story. Red-faced and downhearted paleontologists are growing convinced that they have been snookered by a bit of fossil fakery from China. The feathered dinosaur specimen that they recently unveiled to much fanfare apparently combines the tail of a dinosaur with the body of a bird. Here's what happened. First thing they did wrong was smuggled the bones out of China. That's the first thing that went wrong. Second thing they did wrong was they pasted feathers onto this reptile and then claimed it was an intermediate link. That is not science. That is fraud. What did National Geographic do? Well, a couple months later, they printed out a small little article that you could barely find trying to retract it. But that didn't work. So later, a couple months after that, they printed multiple pages retracting their story. The whole thing was a fraud from the beginning. But yet, people bought into it. Wait a minute. Why? If evolution calls themselves a theory, if evolution says they're a scientific model, why must they continue to resort to false and misleading information? And the only answer we can come up with is they don't have the science to support what they're teaching. Therefore, they must continually resort to misinformation and deception by omission. Let's look at some more of these famous bird mistakes. 1993, the flightless bird on the cover of Time magazine, proving reptiles evolved into birds, turned out not to be a bird, but a theropod dinosaur. 1996, feathered fossil proves some dinosaurs evolved into birds, right out of Science magazine. The feathers turned out to be an array of fibers, nothing to do with birds. One mistake after another. People are believing in evolution. They want to believe in evolution so bad that the evidence does not matter. All that matters is that we believe in evolution. That is no longer science. That is called religious faith. 1998, China, Proto-Archaeopteryx robusta. The comment about that one is this. You have to put it in perspective. To the people who wrote this paper, the chicken would be a feathered dinosaur. If you're going to make a great claim, you have to support it with real evidence. Not fraud, not mistakes, and not by omitting the evidence. And then we have this new discovery, Microraptor gooey. This is supposed to support the gliding in trees model, the one we just described. These creatures climbed up into the trees, glided out of the trees, and eventually their scales evolved into feathers. There's some problems. First of all, birds already existed before this creature. So why is this one still evolving if there were already birds, according to the evolution model? Long feathers on the feet would be a hindrance. Think of this. Here's this creature, a reptile. It's got feathers all over its feet and its forelimbs. How in the world can it continue to survive? It can no longer run on the ground like it could before. It's got feathers holding it down. So it gets eaten up by its predators, and it still can't fly yet. You see, turning scales into feathers is not a benefit. It's a hindrance until you get everything there. The transitional phase would kill it. And then finally, what is the source of all this new information? It requires information to change scales into feathers. It requires information to change solid bones into hollow bones. It requires information to change all those internal anatomy structures. What is the source of all this change? What is the source of all this information? Well, A. Gibbons in Science writes this. It's biophysically impossible to evolve flight from such bipeds with foreshortened forelimbs and heavy balancing tails. Exactly the wrong anatomy for flight. In other words, the creatures evolutionists are supposing changed into birds are anatomically built all wrong for doing this. So the question comes down to, if you're going to make a claim that dinosaurs or reptiles evolved into birds, you must produce the thousands and thousands and thousands of intermediates to support this claim. Words in textbooks, pictures drawn by artists, do not validate their claim. It requires real evidence. So let's look at a summary of the fossil record. Ernst Mayr. He is professor in the Museum of Comparative Zoology at Harvard University. He is also hailed as the Darwin of the 20th century, one of the leading evolutionists out there. And he writes this in his book, What Evolution Is. And he starts, given the fact of evolution, notice he calls evolution a fact, one would expect the fossils to document a gradual, steady change from ancestral forms to the descendants. But this is not what the paleontologist finds. Instead, he or she finds gaps in just about every phyletic series. Now, here's the gentleman they call the Darwin of the 20th century, calling evolution a fact, but yet he is unable to document his facts. Why should I accept evolution if they can't produce the evidence? I already have a faith. Why should I change my faith? Because that's all evolution is a matter of, faith. The evidence clearly supports created after their kind. So let's go to this mechanism for change. In order to have one creature change into another, such as a single cell into an invertebrate into a vertebrate, a fish into amphibian, amphibian into a reptile into a bird or mammal, or an ape-like creature in a human, there has to be some mechanism that will add new information to the DNA. Because it's our DNA that has all the information in it that says what kind of creature we're going to be. For instance, humans, we have 46 chromosomes. If you want to go out there and have 16 chromosomes, you can call yourself an onion. So we have to have some form or mechanism that will add all this information to say that reptile is now going to grow feathers, or that reptile is now going to get hollow bones and its whole heart is going to change, its whole circulatory system is going to change. Something has to add that information. Now, before we get to that, we need to lay a foundation here. We need to understand some definitions. Because what we're seeing in the textbooks is these definitions are constantly changing. So let's lay a foundation for our definitions, then we're going to look at this mechanism for information. First thing is microevolution. Most textbooks give it a very fuzzy definition. What they're really meaning by microevolution is this: genetic variability, natural selection, but not evolution. See, some textbooks call it small changes. But what they're referring to is natural selection and genetic variability, which has nothing to do with evolution. It has everything to do with what we already have in us, the already existing information. God has programmed every species with genetic variability. Just look at the human species. We have people that are just under 4 feet to people over 7 feet tall. That's genetic variability. We have people with many shades of color, light to dark, but it's only one color called melanin. That is genetic variability. We have over 200 flavors of dogs, but they're all dogs. That is genetic variability, not evolution. Then we have something called macroevolution, commonly referred to as Darwinian evolution. That is where one species will gradually change into a new species, such as a reptile into a bird, or an ape-like creature into a human being. That is what we mean by macroevolution. That requires new information. Then we have the genetic variation and natural selection. That is nothing more than variability within kind. We see that in every species today. We see it in the human species, we see it in the dogs, we see it in the cats. Every species has that genetic variability. But the one we're interested in here is macroevolution, because that is the one that requires new information. So let's look at this new information. What are the sources of new information? Well, the only mechanisms for change that evolution proposes are natural selection and mutations. Now, is natural selection enough to cause evolution to occur? Does natural selection cause new information? Is natural selection true? Yes, it is. We observe natural selection everywhere. It's our ability to adapt to our environment. It is also survival of the fittest. We see that all the time. In the human species, we have the ability to adapt to our environment. But can natural selection cause one kind of creature to evolve into another kind of creature called macroevolution? And the answer is no. 1999, October 15th, National Geographic Society and the feathered dinosaur Archaeoraptor. Pages and pages, even colored pictures of this intermediate to prove evolution is true. Well, let's take a look at what happened to this story. Red-faced and downhearted paleontologists out of China. That's the first thing that went wrong. Second thing they did wrong was they pasted feathers onto this reptile and then claimed it was an intermediate link. That is not science. That is fraud. What did National Geographic do? Well, a couple months later, they printed out a small little article that you could barely find trying to retract it. But that just are growing convinced that they have been snookered by a bit of fossil fakery from China. The feathered dinosaur specimen that they recently unveiled to much fanfare apparently combines the tail of a dinosaur with the body of a bird. Here's what happened. First thing they did wrong was smuggled the bones out. It's nowhere found. In other words, what is happening is a great claim from the evolutionists without providing any of the evidence. But wait a minute, here's the evidence. We've got it out on National Geographic. National Geographic gave us all the evidence we need. 19 didn't work. So later, a couple months after that, they printed multiple pages retracting their story. The whole thing was a fraud from the beginning. But yet, people bought into it. Wait a minute. Why? If evolution calls themselves a theory, if evolution says they're a scientific model, why must they continue